Okay, welcome everybody. This is the Friday webinar. Thanks for joining us here in such large numbers today. I'm going to go over what I just placed in the chat box there. And sometimes if people join a little bit later, they actually don't see what I've just put in the chat box. There's a link to a Google Drive folder there. I'm going to go over exactly what's in that folder so that everyone understands and get the most out of this webinar, whether you're watching live here and asking questions as we go, or whether you're going to watch this after the fact. Everyone's going to get the replay link later on today once it's finished processing on my end. So we've got a mock exam in store for everybody today. And I'm just going to stop sharing this part of my screen here so you can see, or actually I'm going to share my screen. I'm just going to change what I'm sharing here. If I can figure out how to exit this screen share. Sometimes Zoom won't let me do that. There we go. Okay, so the Google Drive folder that I just put in the chat box has these items in it here. There's a marking grid there for you to copy off. Those of you that attended the webinar a couple of weeks ago, the mock exam primer, you'll know what that's all about. And also a mock exam grade 4 marking form. So you can mark along with us today and you can compare your comments and marks at the end. I would print off those two documents if you haven't already. Some of you will already have received this a couple of weeks ago when you joined me, but there they are at that link that you can access in the chat box. Also in this folder, what we're going to do today is I'm going to allow each of you to watch the mock exam separately. I'm not going to broadcast it on my screen because the audio quality just isn't going to be good enough. But you're all going to have access to it. I'm going to put either the YouTube link in the chat box in a moment so you can watch it there, or you can see the MP4 in this folder that I've shared with you. You can watch it there as well. Both will be decent quality. And there's also a README file. In the README file is just simply links to each of these documents that I've given you here, as well as one extra thing that I'll mention later on. So that's the folder there. Go to that link, print off the marking grid, print off the marking form for the mock exam grade 4, and you will be fully ready to join us and sort of carry along with us here as we go through this exam grade 4 piano classical. And here's that link one more time to the Google Drive folder. Those of you that are watching this after the fact, you don't worry, you're going to have a link to this Google Drive folder. Everything's going to be there for you. It's just right now I want to make sure that the live audience is able to make this as interactive as possible. Thanks for your support of this webinar too, everybody. This is, one of the most well-attended webinars that we've had over the past year. Since about a year ago when we did the webinar for holding an online recital, that one was also very well attended, well over 100 attendees. So thanks for your support of this. Now, if you're having trouble printing one of the documents, don't worry, you'll be able to follow along with the exam and just make notes on a piece of paper with marks. And I'll show you what the marking scheme is. I'll put that up on the screen here in a little bit. So a little bit in advance here. This is Friday webinar. I'm sure most of you have been to one of these before. Every Friday we try to hold these, except on holidays. I'll just go over the schedule for the coming few Fridays. Next Friday, Christopher Norton's going to be here in my absence. I'll be there to sort of let him in and get things started, but he doesn't know this yet, but I'm actually not going to be there for the whole time. I'll actually be away adjudicating suddenly up in Hearst, Ontario at their music festival. But I have arranged that I'll be able to start the webinar and get him started, and then you'll enjoy his presentation where he's going to go over music by his wife, Wendy Norton. She's written a whole bunch of different music there that he wants to share with you, and I know a bunch of you registered for that already and are curious to see what that music is like. I have a bunch of it here myself, and I enjoy playing through it, so I'm sure you will as well. And then the Friday after that, Friday, May 6th, we're going to have Cecile de Rosier and Eleanor Gummer back for part 3 in their series on performance practice ideas using music by women composers. They've done the Baroque and the classical period already. And on Friday, May 6th, they're going to do the Romantic period, again, with some live demonstrations from the piano, etc. That's always a really fun hour and a half. They often make it. And so those of you that are interested in that, I highly encourage you to attend. All sorts of performance practice ideas from phrasing, dynamics, articulation, pedaling will be a key part of that one, I'm sure, I suspect. So that's Friday, May 6th. And then beyond that, I'm going to be recording some more mock exams early in May. So I'm hoping that by Friday, May 13th, I will have another mock exam for you. And it looks like it may very well be a level 5 contemporary idioms piano exam, which would be really great to see behind the scenes. We've never done a mock exam for contemporary idioms piano before. And I think you'll really like that, and I'm hoping this works out. Okay, so assuming that you've got everything organized there in terms of the marking form to print off, as you see on my screen, the marking grid to kind of mark along with. Later on, I'll give you the link to YouTube in a moment. I'm just going to go back to my presentation here and get us started and sort of focus the discussion in terms of where we need to go with this so that you can get the most out of it. Okay, someone's asking here, is it possible to get a replay of the mock exam primer I did a couple of weeks ago? Yeah, just simply email me and I'll send you a link to that so that you can see the primer. It's a great idea. Anyone who wants that, just email me and we can get that to you. Here's what the marking grid looks like. It allows examiners to take any piece or any small element or large element on the exam and mark it as a percentage out of 100. Pardon me, I'm going to be coughing a little bit. I apologize. I've been sick the last couple of weeks, but feeling much better today. And it breaks down the marks into 1 decimal place. And so this is a really great thing, a really great tool to have. And you'll notice when you're marking along that, you know, how valuable this sheet is. So again, this is in the Google Drive folder in the link that I've shared in the chat box there a couple of times. And you can print this off and use it at your leisure. And then the marking form, this is just a generic blank grade 4 piano classical marking form with all the different line items and marks there. And you'll be able to go through there and mark piece by piece there over the 18 or 19 minutes that you're going to see shortly in the YouTube video. Here's what the mark distribution looks like. If you're not able to print off the marking form or something for whatever reason, this is probably good just to copy down quickly what the breakdown is. Pardon me. So I'll just leave this up for a second here in case anyone needs a refresher. This is straight out of the syllabus. Straight out of the syllabus, you can see how many marks are allotted for each particular element. And this will correspond directly with the marking form. I'll also be able to give you a breakdown of this. We're going to go in quite a bit of detail after we watch this together separately on our devices. I'll talk just a bit about the critical listening protocol again. Some of you have been introduced to this quite a while ago if you're an examiner with us, or if you took in the mock exam primer a couple of weeks ago. And I've also brought this up from time to time at other presentations. The idea of trying to get examiners around a more fixed sort of idea of how we're listening to repertoire. And it all starts with the idea of core sound and tone quality. What is the sound that student is producing? And on the piano, we often neglect that. It's the one instrument we kind of, any percussion instrument, we kind of neglect that aspect of listening. But if you listen to a string player, brass player, woodwind, a singer for sure, the first thing we're sort of subconsciously really assessing, what's the quality of the sound that they're producing with their instrument? On the piano, again, it gets kind of overlooked, but it's something that for us is at the foremost of our mind. It's always in the front and the back of our mind sort of simultaneously. And everything else gets kind of wrapped into it. So I put it at the bottom of this protocol. And I talk about examiners listening in layers, and we do this a lot with examiners when we do examiner training. Rhythm is the first thing that we want to assess along with correct notes. Notes and rhythm are both sort of number one in terms of priority. And for me, I really feel that rhythm's even a little bit more important than the correct notes. If one of these foundation layers, you know, one of these musical elements isn't in place, the examiner's ear does not progress to the next level of listening. So if we have serious rhythmic problems where there are frequent hesitations, stumbles, the tempo's fluctuating a little bit too much, or maybe there are some chronically learned incorrect notes, those are the things that the examiner is going to comment on first as a foundation layer to make sure that that gets across to the student. It's those sort of foundational, layers that prevent students from scoring in the 80s, let's say. If we have rhythm and correct notes more or less in place, then the student has a chance to score 80% and the examiner's ear progresses to the next level of listening. And on this protocol, I've labeled that as articulation. How are the notes being spoken? Legato versus staccato? How are those notes put into gestures so that we can hear audible gestures? Is the level of staccato or detachedness crisp enough for the style? All those kinds of things. What is the quality of the legato, the overlap of the keys? How is the student producing the legato? That's the sort of next layer of listening. And once that's in place, then the examiner's ear progresses to phrasing, inflection, and dynamics. Can we hear obvious dynamic variety? And now that we're hearing a lot of our students more and more online in these assessments, that's becoming a little harder, honestly. And we'll hear a little bit of that today, how successful it can be when we're using good equipment. So dynamics, are there dynamic contrasts? Do they match what the composer may have intended? Are they reflective of the stylistic period that we're listening to? And then phrasing inflection. Is there a sense of inflection in the phrases, or is it all just monotone? If the playing is monotone, but there's some articulation and the rhythms in place with correct notes, we're probably in the mid 80s, mid to low 80s somewhere. Once we get dynamics organized, and we're hearing some phrasing inflection, then we're into the middle 80s, maybe even upper 80s. And then the ear progresses to style and performance practice. Performance practice in terms of something I often call dialect. Does it sound like they know what classical music is? Does it sound like they know what Baroque music is? And are they able to portray that through the texture, through the articulation, through the dynamics? And then style. Are they using the pedal appropriately for this romantic music? Other considerations come into play. And if those things are being met and it's convincing, then we're into the upper 80s in terms of an assessment, maybe even into the 90s, depending on the structure and the depth of the communication. Two things here, actually. Depth of communication gets a little bit back to core sound and the student's ability to communicate through these all other ideas. Are they able to communicate musically? And it's something we're going to hear very strongly today in the student that we're going to listen to doing grade 4. Structure is more about, can we hear a frame around this music? Does it sound like the student has a concept of the whole thing, the beginning, the middle, the end? If it's an ABA piece, is it obvious for us to hear that A leads to B, leads back to A? And is the student working through the transition between those sections in a musical way that shows off that structure to the listener? We'll talk about that in a couple places today, and I'll try and mention each one of these things as we hear them. As we do a bunch more of these mock exams, I'd like to record a bunch of these over the next year, and we can go through this exercise many, many times and start to fill in this critical listening protocol. If you have any questions about it, let me know. But again, the idea is we're trying to get the assessment across that it's a snapshot in time. We talked about some of these things last time in the primer 2 weeks ago. It's a snapshot in time, and we're just simply listening along these layers. Some pieces are going to be more successful than others, and those that are more successful in scoring in the 90s meet all of these conditions. Some of them that are struggling to achieve 80% don't really have the rhythm in place, and that's a huge thing. And as teachers, we know it takes months and years to develop students with good rhythm, generally, by and large, and we all have our ways of doing and achieving that. Okay, so that's critical listening protocol. We're going to go into the pieces here and listen to this whole exam. I recorded this on the Musicology app, which we had Rebecca Featherstone in months ago now to give us an overview of the Musicology app. I started using it right away with my online students, and I've done a couple of exams on it. I find the audio quality just a little bit better than it is on Zoom. The microphone's always wide open. For the most part, it's fairly quiet, but when a student wants to play loud, we hear those dynamic differences. You're going to hear that today. A lot of it still depends on the student's equipment, what their hardware is, what kind of laptop they're using, if they're using an external mic or not. For this particular exam, my audio is coming through very well. I've got an external mic. His audio of the student for the playing isn't bad. We'll hear everything pretty clearly. His spoken word, I apologize, is a little quiet, and there's something on my end that I need to do. I need to mute my microphone while he's playing, and that will improve the audio next time. I'm learning something every time out with this thing. And I've just simply, I wasn't able to record it in the Musicology app, but I recorded it just using a simple screen capture. And so just capturing everything that's on my screen and in my audio, and I was able to capture both our audios and mix them together and make it sort of sound good. But there is I apologize, a good humming or some noise that I'm getting from my computer that's in that's in that recording, but it should be good enough to hear everything that we need to hear to make an assessment today. And so rather than me broadcasting that, which is going to degrade the audio for all of us a little bit, I'm going to put the YouTube link in the chat box here. 1 second. So the YouTube link is going to take you to YouTube. We're all going to watch this 18 or 19 minutes quietly among ourselves, mark along. After that 20 minutes, we'll come back, we'll say hello again, and we'll go through, I've got a slideshow that will break down every last element that he does with Mark's comments. You can ask a ton of questions. We've got a lot of time. We can really geek out on this and really have a lot of fun with it, I think. Any questions at any point in the process, I'll keep my eyes glued to the screen, throw it in the chat box, throw it in the Q&A. I don't see anything in there right now. So you can get this as well in that Google Drive folder, but I'm also just putting it in the chat box right now on YouTube. Go ahead and watch. I'll watch for questions. I'm going to pause the recording. Those of you that are watching later, go ahead and pause the whole replay. Go ahead and evaluate, and we'll come back in about 20 minutes and we'll assess together. Enjoy. Okay, so welcome back, everyone. I know a lot of you are just finishing up. Some of you are finished. Take a moment, if you've got a calculator there, to total up all of your marks and add up to out of 100. And when you're ready and you have that, if you don't mind, just throw it in the chat box. What's your number out of 100 that you came up with? We'll compare and talk about why. But it'll be interesting, and that'll give us confirmation as well that I know you're finished the process and we can move on together. Okay, so Francis, Viva Voce is now called background questions. So you'll see background questions on the marking form out of 6. And there are marks for memory also on the marking form, 1 mark for each of the group pieces. The marking grid. Yeah, we went over that briefly in the primer a couple of weeks ago. Basically, you have to look at, if you're marking something out of 10, it's quite straightforward. But if you're marking something out of 6, let's say, then you go along in percentage. Everything we think of is in a percentage, what percentage you think the student should get for that particular element, and you match it up with a mark out of 6, and you come to the mark out of 6 that gives you the percentage that you want to see. See questions coming into the group, the Q&A, which is great. I'll get to those in a bit as we go. Okay, so we have our first numbers coming in here. We've got 92.9, 87, 93, 88, 84, 89, 93. Beautiful, beautiful marks. 91, 90, 91. Keep those marks coming in. Let's see, the consensus is somewhere around a 90 so far. Some of you are in the 80s, some of you are in the high 90s. Honestly, you know, at first glance, this is a student we don't see too often in terms of this level of preparedness. The other thing I'll mention, I see a couple of 89s there. When an examiner comes up to 89 at the end of their marking for an exam, we don't settle on 89. This mark will get rounded up to a 90. We would find a way to do that. We don't like to give out 89. You'll never see a student with a final mark of 79 or 69, just so you know. Okay, so in the interest of time, let's go back to my slideshow here. We talked about the critical listening protocol. Let's get into this exam and talk about the different elements of it here. The first piece that we heard, and first, there's something in the Q&A there. Students will often get a choice of what they want to do first. Usually, it depends on the student. We make a pretty quick assessment. Would you like to do your pieces first or your technique? Or you know, if they, you know, if we feel like we can trust them enough in the moment that they're not going to take forever to decide, and sometimes we make that mistake, what would you like to start with first today? And sometimes they freeze, they often freeze. So that's why you'll often hear, you know, is it the pieces or technique? We guide them a little bit, but give them some leeway. If they've got a definite idea, they can override us whenever they want. Feel free to coach them however you want. I want to start with my ear training, please. Sure, let's do it. Let's start with your ear training. What would you like to do next? If a student has an idea of what they want to do and how they want to script this thing, that's up to them. They can totally do that because we have the time, right? This grade 4 exam is budgeted for 25 minutes. You can see on the recording that took us about 19 minutes max today. We always have tons of time. So we have time to, you know, cater to what they need and what they want to do. Sorry, I've just lost. I have to get Zoom back on side here. 1 second. I have to share my screen. That's my problem. So that I can still see what's going on in the chat box if anyone's having any issues. Okay, so thanks for everyone for throwing your marks in there. Okay, so that answers Kim's first question. Do all examiners give the student a choice, more or less? If the student seems hesitant, we don't always give that choice, but usually there is some kind of choice, and students can certainly speak up. Can you use grades 7 and 8 for high school credits? Yes, absolutely. Just like RCM, it's the same deal as RCM. And Maryland's having 95. Very good. Okay, critical listening protocol we've talked about. Let's get into the Lure by Telemann. Here are some of the comments, and again, going up that critical listening protocol, the tempo and the pulse is steady, suitable, patient moderato. It's a moderato tempo that's not too fast. It's easy to just get, you know, students just love to get going through things sometimes and they play too quickly. This was patient, it was thoughtful in terms of tempo, and that was steady, that foundation layer, there's no question about it. We are into the 80s. Articulation is suitable and dance-like. There was a lot of lifting going on. Careful short phrases, very stylistically appropriate for Baroque music. The ear moves on and listens for some dynamic contrasts. Not really hearing a lot of dynamic contrast and reflection in this one. Could be more exaggerated, I think, and that kind of holds the mark back a little bit for me. Some lovely work with the ornaments on the repeats. This is something that we put into the syllabus back in 2018 when we did the classical piano syllabus. For Baroque music only, students can do repeats, especially if they want to do some ornamentation the second time through. Student takes full advantage of that. That's lovely to hear. A comment, there's a heavy feeling on each downbeat. Less of this would allow us to hear longer lines. It gets a little bit predictable and stately. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. It's a bit too predictable beat-wise. And so that's one thing we'd like to see, just to encourage a little bit more fluency. And we're always thinking too, hey, this is pretty good playing. There's nothing wrong with it, really. But now I'm like, we're in the upper 80s with this. Mark, does it go into the 90s? And if so, why? Yes. And if not, what's holding it back? Well, to me, we will hear some students play without that really marked beat 1 pulse. It's something that I like to call spelling. This isn't a chronic speller. It's still very fluent. It's still very enjoyable. Just if you go back and listen to that Lure again, you're going to hear this rather hypnotic. You always know where beat 1 is. The student that can preempt that in many cases and create longer lines out of it's going to get a slightly higher mark. Any questions along the way about anything I'm saying, throw it in the chat box or the Q&A. I'd love to address it with you. And so the mark I'm getting here is 8.9 out of 10. I think it's really close to a 90. It's really close to that, but I'm kind of holding back. I want to see what his next piece is and see if he can give us that fluency in a slightly different way. See if we can really hear the dynamic contrast. I can understand maybe why some of the dynamics aren't there, but I'm going to be listening more in the next piece for that as an examiner. Allegro Mozart, also a group 1 piece. Here are the comments. Pulse is steady with good fluency and strong sense of rhythm. No problem there. Well in hand, it's very steady. Nothing to worry about rhythmically. We move up the next layer to articulation. It's crisp and tidy, and we're hearing some suitable gestures, especially the way he just drops into those 30 seconds on an upbeat and creates an up gesture going to the downbeat. I really love it. Difficult to hear the dynamic contrasts, and he missed the opportunity for quieter piano dynamic. I noted that, by the middle, there's, at the beginning of the section B, I believe it is, there's a golden opportunity there to get a little bit quieter. I'm going to make sure, I'm just going to look at the score here and make sure I'm thinking about the right thing. And so it's like, gee, I'm still not getting the dynamics really clear. A bit of a bummer, but there's so many other good things happening, it's not the end of the world. Good musical sense, would like to hear more inflected gestures in the repeated staccato notes. I'm noting again too that it's just a little bit spelled. Those staccato on beats 1, 2, and 3, they're not heavy, but they're all roughly the same. And so, there's another player could come in, we hear it, where there's just more fluency, more of a sense of longer lines sometimes. Strong technique needs a bit more shape on two-note slurs, measures 22 and 24. This is a detailed comment. We don't often get too much into detail actually on exam, but at least I hope we don't. We want to get the big picture. We want to get the big idea so that the teacher and the student, especially the parents, can see what is going well and maybe what needs to be improved. Okay, so, but this was one thing that was a bit more blatant. It's a dialect thing, not taking care to give us a down-up gesture on a downbeat and an upbeat two-note slur on beats 1 and 2. So a couple of detailed things there. I felt I needed to justify the mark here a little bit because it's still not quite in the 90s. The student has all the makings of a 90% performance on the pieces, and yet there's just a couple of more obvious things that we'll hear at other performances that set the bar a little higher, and so we want to make sure we notate why that is. Let's get into the chat box. What happens when students are playing on a less than great piano? Dynamics will be difficult to hear. Yeah, that's a problem, especially right now when students are playing at home. We need to be able to hear it though. But still, because of the way we've got the critical listening protocol set up, a student can still get 84, 85% without dynamics, but they have to be attempting them. And if it's a pianoforte worth any kind of, worth any kind of, I don't want to say money or value, if there's some value in the instrument, the whole idea of the piano should be that you can alter dynamics. Sometimes it comes down to a lot to their equipment too. Unfortunately, they're using a laptop where the mic is hidden underneath and everything's just a little bit too muffled. It's unfortunate. We'd love them to have external microphones. Now that pandemic restrictions are lifting, we're hearing a little bit better because a lot of students are doing this in their teacher studios. We're getting better audio quality, and we're noting that. Through the pandemic, when things were tough at home, where all these pianos are out of tune, they can't even be tuned, we're watching really carefully. We're listening for the dynamics. We weren't hearing a lot of them, but we were watching for them as well to see if that was coming out. There were things examiners were asking to verify, hey, at the beginning of the exam or partway through some, can you just play something really loud for me? Can you play something really quiet for me? To see if we were getting the difference. And so we were trying to verify that way as well. And we were also stopping and working through Zoom to make sure the settings were there that would allow for that, putting original sound on, making sure the microphone wasn't compressing too much of the volume. This is why I like musicology now, because we don't have to do any of that. And you can hear it. You can hear it in the recording today. It's picking up the piano beautifully, and you're hearing these nuances without any fuss. That's what I really like about the app. So 8.8, let me get into some of the questions. Background info at the beginning of each piece. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Some examiners are in that habit, but it isn't always the case. It's a quick way to judge quickly. Hey, does the student know the title, the key, the composer? While I'm here, I'm going to ask him about Mozart. That's an obvious one for grade 4 that maybe he knows a couple of things about. And luckily he did know a couple of things, maybe not enough, but this is only grade 4. It's the first time we asked him about background information on composer specifically. So we're not looking for a lot there yet. And then at the conclusion, whether it's an in-person exam or not, that's where I'll go in and I will ask Esther questions, get them to point to a sign. I'll point to a sign and they can identify it. So it happens scattered throughout the exam. Are all group pieces rated equally? The Lura has difficult trills and the trills don't have to be done. But grade 4, we start to see trills. We start to expect them happening. This is nice because you hear this student, he's at an honest grade 4 level and he's able to execute them. So that sets the bar high for everybody, really. But all the group pieces are rated equally. That's why they're all out of 10. That's a good question. And I see a couple other questions I'll come back to later on here that are suitable for later. I want to make sure I answer all of these. Okay, let's go into the third piece. This is group 2 piece, which is romantic and modern music, Monkeys in the Tree, Boris Berlin. Lively, brisk tempo with excellent fluency. Excellent use of articulation. It was all there. Dynamic contrasts are audible, and now they have character as well, which is really great. Strong sense of structure with creative and careful transitions. That creates the structure. We can feel that this has a beginning, a middle, and an end. We know where we are. We come away at the end of it as a listener with a frame around the piece, and we know where we've been and we know where we've journeyed to. That's obvious with this piece. Very enjoyable overall. It was nice to finally hear the dynamics in there. A little bit of extra fluency I wasn't hearing in the first two pieces. And I was like, okay, here's the 90 I really wanted to give it. So I'm up at 9.2 out of 10 would be a fair mark for Monkeys in the Tree. Prelude number 4, we hear this one often. A really great contrast to the previous piece because he's going to get to show off something slower again and something really legato, difficult to balance the hands, all sorts of pitfalls in this one. Good balance between the hands. The melody projects really well. Long notes decaying into a terrible, not a terrible, but a bad microphone. Musicology picks it up, sustains those long notes, and he's got the left hand suitably out of the way. Most students online, we wouldn't hear it with this level of care. But the recording doesn't lie either, right? He's able to keep those left-hand triplets in the background, striking those right-hand notes are almost forte. And honestly, in a situation like this, it almost has to be that way. There's recording techniques a little different. I just finished adjudicating a music festival online in St. John's, and I'm supposed to give some talks to the students next week. And that's one of the things I'm going to talk about. Hey, if we're going to be doing things online, this is what we have to consider in terms of recording techniques sometimes. We have to do things a little bit differently to make it obvious. Our audience and our listener is now behind a different type of veil. So it's worth considering, but you can hear here, it absolutely works. The tempo is steady and patient again. Good work staying on time. This piece is so easy to get bogged down and the left hand has to travel so far, but he does a good job at keeping things moving. We don't always hear that in this piece. Perhaps could use a bit more flow from the tempo. Sometimes it got a little hesitant. It's still within the allowable limits, but you'll hear some students work some inner magic between the notes. It's one thing that we could use a little bit more to extract. And we want to comment on that so they know why they're not getting 95 or 100 on this piece. Left hand supports in the background. Suitable accelerando in the second part adds excitement and structure again. Doesn't let us get stuck in the mud too much. And good use for fermatas in the last line with good musical sense. He made sense of those awkward markings, double fermatas, like what is the composer really looking for here? It's hard to notate what they're looking for, but he makes it make musical sense so that it's got some phrasing, the inflection is holding everything together. So my mark here is 9.1 out of 10 on this. We don't usually hear all of this coming together so well like this. And there's structure there, there's a good tone. And again, this idea of core sound, he knows how to play from his arms. And everything is well supported. Flow from the tempo, yeah, and that's a great question. It's just simply a fluency thing. Sometimes I just wanted those. It got a little away from 3/4, or sorry, from 4/4. The piece is written in 4/4 in triplets instead of written in 12/8, and yet we are hearing a lot of 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 4. Some students, you will hear those 8 notes flowing a little bit more effortlessly. Maybe, because I've got a decent mic here. Let's open up my mic if I can. And I'll give you an idea of the little bit of what I mean by flow. And it's hard to find the words sometimes so that everyone understands. I'm glad you asked that. Okay, original sounds on. And that's the other danger too, is everyone's got their own vocabulary in this, and so on an exam form, I'm sure you've all read things quite regularly that we don't understand, or we just don't quite have context for it. Okay, so in the left hand, I'm almost marking the beats a little bit too much. Whereas a student, here I'll have my right hand here. Let's see if we can get this with a little more rhythmic flow. I'm not going to be so fixated on the beats. No sense of beats, no accenting. I'm accenting the downbeat with my left hand, and the other 12 notes are just simply a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and so on. So that's what I'm thinking by a little bit of extra flow there. I gotta get original sound off. 1 second, so you can hear me better. Let's see if you have any other questions or thoughts about that. So perhaps not tempo, but pulse. I found I couldn't hear the triplets in his playing. He's got them in the background, but we'll hear some students not marking. If you listen back to it, it just got a little bit too draggy. Some students find a certain magic that allows that to move forward a little bit more as if on a conveyor belt. Who is the composer of this prelude for? This is Catherine Rolla, American composer. Let's see here. Okay, I'll come back to the Q&A. I don't want to lose our flow here. Own choice piece, sonatina by Hook, going back to classical period. Own choice is something students can do whatever they want, as long as it's at that level and as long as teachers think it's at that level. Tempo well maintained throughout. Captured the jocoso humor through the articulation and the tempo. Some dynamic contrast coming through nicely. That was good to hear. Could hear more from the crescendo diminuendo inflection at times as lines rise, they get a little louder, as they come down a little quieter, like he did in the scales later. Fluent eights, well articulated, nice color change in the second section to go to the minor key. Something we don't hear a lot of, but he took care to change the color as well as the dynamic at that point. To me, everything's in place here, and again, we're well into the 90s, 9.3. Even though it's an own choice piece, we're still looking in the same detail as the group pieces, really. It's worth the same amount of marks. It's another piece. We're not marking the own choice piece any differently. In the old days, in the previous syllabus, the supplementary piece may have only been worth 6 marks, and that was a little different marking scale. We've changed that, though. This is another important piece that students are playing. They just get to choose it themselves. Background information gets scattered throughout. He was able to identify pieces, composers, and titles. He gave some details about Mozart. Would have liked to hear more, but in the moment he said a couple things. He was able to relate to the signs and terms. He was unable to come up with the word tenuto on his own. But I took it at face value that he knew what I meant. He was able to describe what it was. And at grade 4, it's hard to get all those things. So I mean, obviously a really well-prepared student. I wanted to challenge him, but can he come up with the word tenuto? Ideally, I would like to put the score in front of him in person and say, can you point to a tenuto? That's one of my favorite questions at this level to ask. And then it's more likely that they're able to do it. Have you heard that word before? You know, if they've never heard that word before and they couldn't describe it, then I would take a half mark off and he'd get 5.5 out of 6. But in this case, I wanted to give him a 6 out of 6. I like what he's doing. I think he's intelligent. And so that's why I go with 6 out of 6, even though he couldn't come up with that word on his own right away. Technique, good recall and fluency. He knew right away what all the elements are. Strong technical use of the arms and the hands. He's playing with really good arm weight, and that's what we're assessing here. We're assessing the toolbox. What's the core sound like? Nice shape to the scales. We don't hear that too often. We hear a lot of that. This is a British Columbia student who lives in the Lower Mainland. We hear that a lot out there. Not so much of that anywhere else. So good for the teachers out there for getting that going. He got away with quick, solid chords. You know, this kind of it's pretty quick. It's risky. He got away with it. It's nice. We don't mind, though, in solid chords, hearing something solid with full tone. Take a little bit more time. I encourage my students to relax at the bottom of each of those so that we're creating something that's got a full bow to it. He got away with it. I didn't take any marks off for that. But we are listening for tone more than speed. Tempo on the arpeggios is a bit risky. He was really going for it, and you know, you can play arpeggios. I'm sure he can play those on his own, but as soon as the camera's on and the mic's on and it's all on the line, he could probably afford to take that a little less. There were a couple stumbles there, and that's what brings the mark back just slightly. 13.2 out of 14 is a decent mark for technique. I wouldn't go any less than 12.8 out of 14 on this. Some of you may have quite a bit higher than that, and that's fine too. Francis, you noticed that I told him very good job. I tend to just say thank you. Yep. Yeah, there's differences in examiners and how they do it. We want to be encouraging. Hey, my volume has dropped. Sorry about that. I'm going to check on my level because sometimes Zoom cuts me down. Just give me a second. Some of you may see my settings come up here. Okay, I'm showing full microphone volume here now. I'm going to take off the automatically adjust microphone volume just to make sure I'm still audible. So I'm assuming I'm Okay, it may have been too far from, okay, my mic's still right there. If that's not working out, please let me know and I'll have to figure out what else is happening. Yeah, you'll hear a lot of examiners, Francis, back to this. We do hear a lot of examiners now revealing the quality of the work that's going on. We're trying to be encouraging. And so that's why you're going to hear that kind of thing nowadays. Yeah, I'd say 20 years ago, yeah, we didn't hear that at all. Chords are just one octave still, correct? Hey, that's a good question for grade 4. I know he played those chords 2 octaves. Okay, we got to go to the syllabus. Go to the syllabus and check. I'm doubting myself suddenly. I didn't think anything of it in grade 4 when he did his chords 2 octaves, but it may only be just one. I think it's 2 octaves on grade 4 now. Okay, thanks. The microphone's better. Do students lose memory marks if they make mistakes? That's a good question. It's pretty much all or nothing. And so if a student does not have the score in front of them, we give them 1 out of 1 for attempting and getting that memory to happen. We don't give part marks for memory anymore. It'll be reflected in the mark for the piece though. So if they, if they kind of bomb the piece, they don't get through, there's hesitations, there's memory lapses, but they never open the book, we tend to give them 1 out of 1 for memory, but then the piece itself is going to have some fatal flaws and the mark will be in the 70s or less. It's only 1 octave for grade 4, but 2 for grade 5. Okay, so he's been coached along the way to do 2 octave chords. He did it and got away with it. I wouldn't take any marks off for that, but we would rather see him just do 1 octave. If I caught that, if I knew my syllabus a little better, which I should, then I would make a comment to that so the teacher knows. Sometimes we catch those things, sometimes we don't. Examiners are out in the field with 4 core syllabi in their brains at all times. Classical CI voice, classical CI piano, and they're doing all 4 of those. And you're rotating between all 4. Sometimes every exam is a different syllabus. It's impossible to know all these things. So we try to have it open all the time so that we've got it there and don't make any mistakes. Back into the chat box. Arpeggios were in triplets rather than 8s. Does that matter? Not really. Mathematically, it works out both. Yeah, he did play them in triplets, Marcia. That's really insightful. That allows him to get the speed too. Okay, Carrie, thanks for that about the encouragement. You appreciate encouragement. Marcia, I know you also appreciate the encouragement. And this is the thing nowadays. I say this a lot lately. The question comes up. The question has not come up here, but I'm going to address it again anyway, because I try to do it every chance I get. And in another life, I work as a functional health coach, and I'm aware of the stats in terms of autism spectrum disorder, let's say, and chronic disease amongst kids. This is shocking, but in 2011, the US calculated, the Centers for Disease Control calculated that up to 52% of all children have at least one chronic disease. A lot of that is cognitive in nature. The numbers coming out of the US for 2016 on autism spectrum disorder, 1 in 33. We don't know what the latest numbers are, but as studio teachers, we see our fair share of these kids. They're incredibly talented. Yeah, there are some cognitive issues, and so we're constantly on the lookout for that. And you just talk to anyone at a university that has what we call an SAS, a special, I can't remember what it stands for exactly, but students that get accommodations for things. It's absolutely through the roof. Most students have accommodations nowadays. They get extra time in exams and things. So one way that we try to cater to that, and we've done this, if a teacher sends us an email in advance so we know what the student's dealing with, this is where that encouragement piece comes in. So it's just part of my nature now that I'm always sniffing that out, and everything I'm doing is going to be an encouraging comment, because that's what these kids need to survive and perform. Otherwise, we could have a meltdown. Sometimes we hear about it in advance as examiners, and we appreciate that, so we know what we're dealing with, so we can help the students succeed. That's what it's all about nowadays for us. Let's get these students to succeed. Let's do everything we can to help them succeed. And that little bit of encouragement, they know right away. There's some that don't need it, and this student probably didn't need it, but you never know. It's often the more talented ones that have these issues that we need to be careful of, and anything in my tone could derail that very quickly. So we appreciate hearing about those things in advance, and that's part of the encouragement. I see that coming up in the comments a lot here today, so I wanted to address that. Yeah, arpeggio triplets, go for it. It helps the speed a little bit. I think it works. I thought broken chords were shown as triplets in the syllabus example for grade 1 and 2. Yeah, Yeah, broken chords, yes. Arpeggios still can be in triplets. I think we notate them in eighths just to give students the chance to play them slower, but they can be in triplets. I think it works well. Okay, so Marcia's telling us, yeah, Marcia got a hold of us last year and said, hey, I have a number of students here that all have, are going to need some kind of accommodation to make this work. We allowed her to be in the exam room there, of course, in the studio with these kids, guiding them along, making sure that we could, get them excited about it. And she's saying here, yeah, all of the accommodated students last year were just excited about this year's exams, whereas a year ago it was like, well, should we even do this? And so that's just, a testament to what we were able to do for Marcia's students there in a community where this kind of thing is quite prominent. Kim, thanks for that encouragement too about examiners. Encouragement, friendliness, lots of these. This is great. Anita, good point. Yeah, arpeggios and triplets may result in thumping thumb syndrome. Yeah, because it's going so fast. Sometimes, especially with this kid too. I don't really hear this student, that thump and thumb, but we can get that in eighths too. But that's definitely something to consider. So do what works for the student. I do want to get back to the Q&A at some point too. I'm focusing more on the chat box. Sight reading, very quickly, clapping, playing. Musicology, yeah, we can hear the clapping clearly. On Zoom, we can't. Often in Zoom, I get students to play a key first. So they've got the microphone after I've just said something, and then do their clapping or tapping so that we can hear better. Musicology doesn't matter. And you'll notice in the bottom of the screen, I was showing the example, but on the bottom of the screen, I'm watching the student as well, like a hawk, so I can match with what I'm seeing with what I'm hearing to make sure we've got it right. This is one of the trickiest things is ear training for online exams, but we're working through it, and I think we're doing all right. Playing, didn't hear any problems at all with the sight reading. He can clap, he can play, he understands rhythm. That was quite exemplary. And same with the keyboard skills. No problem. He can do the chord progression, did it with the pedal. He knew what I was talking about. He got through the harmonization with no trouble. That's the first time we do it in grade 4. So full marks. Now you can see, once a student's scoring 13 out of 14 on the technique and he's nailing the skills to this level, and I believe 9 out of 10 on ear training, he's going to be well in the 90s. Even though a couple of the pieces are at 8.9, 8.8, some of the pieces are in the 90s. When they're nailing skills like this, that's what gets kids well into the 90s. That bonus mark for Canadian composer gets them a little further up there than I might have expected. Instead of 93.5 was kind of in my mind, 94.5 it comes out. The top mark in the country for grade 4 is probably 96 most years now, somewhere between 94 and 96. And really it is the strength of the skills that'll do that for students with that kind of result. Go ahead and throw questions in the Q&A. Raise your hand if you want to come on and talk. And I'm going to try and get through more of these questions here. I thought I heard crescendo diminuendo in the scales. Yes, you did hear it right. Absolutely. I approve of more honest encouragement and friendliness and support the examiner knowing the student's needs. Yeah, emotional, physical stress, so much improved over time. Yeah, I'm glad. These exams are accredited for credit, all this other kind of stuff. Most students don't get there. Most of these students are doing grades 1 to 4 exams, and after that, it doesn't happen so much anymore. We do have students, of course, doing 5 to 10 in the diploma, but it's not many. Those are the serious students. The grades 1 to 4, this is about something else. It's about keeping them going, and it's so easy. We've turned off so many students in the past with an attitude that isn't going to serve them. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, how many of your students want to do exams anymore? Very few in my studio anyways. Very few students want to achieve that level, want to exceed, want to excel. And so the ones that do, we want to be right behind them. We want to prop them up as best we can. Okay, Tammy, told years ago, if there wasn't a strong beat on count 1 in the clapping, they wouldn't get 100%, even if the clapping was correct. I just find most students just don't clap well anymore. They're afraid of it. It hurts them or something. I don't know. We're just happy that we hear the right rhythm. It's nice to have that natural accentuation, but that's I could see how maybe 20 years ago we marked that, and that's a good point. But we're not doing that anymore. We're not afraid to give out full marks on these things. Okay, the rule regarding repeats in classical repertoire, repeated sections or not. Okay, so no repeats. The only repeats we ask for now are grade 6 and up for Baroque music only, and it's optional. if you want to go and they want to experiment with ornamentation on the repeat. Otherwise, you can just disregard all repeats. In contemporary music, it's even more liberal than that. You can cut entire sections to create condensed versions that are more level appropriate and more length appropriate to the exam and the level that they're trying. Any consideration given to the fact that it's only a grade 4 level, or is there an expectation that performance should be comparable to a concert pianist? Excellent question. I love this. I'm always thinking higher. I mean, marks are inflated these days a lot of the times. I think they're maybe a little too high sometimes. But this student definitely deserved the marks he got, I thought. And most of us seem to be in agreement there when you submit your final marks and we compare. But the expectation, I'm always trying to compare to, okay, why is this 9.2 out of 10 and not 9.9 or 10 out of 10? Because I know another student at this age could come along and do even better. And I try to find a way to articulate why if we can. Sometimes it's 9 out of 10 and that's all we can't write it down. You saw when you're marking, there's just so much going on. It goes by so fast. We're trying not to let the student be rushed, but at the same time, I'm not letting them sit there in between pieces. Sometimes it's hard to come up with that reason, but at the end, maybe we'll try to frame a comment as to what could be done even better. So we're always comparing to the concert pianist, especially at level 4. Even at level 1, there are students that come and just blow our minds these days and score 96, 97 on their grade 1 piano exam because they're playing like concert pianists. And there's so many times where we hear, and especially grade 2, 3, 4 students, you don't mind paying to hear them play. So a little food for thought there. Sandra, I discovered about myself that my comments are spot on, but the marks I arrive at are too tough. Yeah, that's good. That's what this exercise is about. And honestly, this is what we do with our examiners to bring those marks more in line. Our marks maybe used to be a little wider. Hopefully you're finding them narrow up because we're doing these kind of things yearly with examiners so that we're all, we all are hearing it the same way. The comments are all the same, but the mark that we're assigning to it. And a big part of it for us is the critical listening protocol, which I shared earlier in the slideshow. We're trying to wrap the idea of the examiner's ideas around some kind of framework so that we get those marks a little more in line with each other. Yeah, that's a good point, Kim. We need our students to move forward in CC exams because it develops leadership. It develops all these wonderful, wonderful skills, right? And these are the students that are excelling, and what better way to do it? So yeah, thanks for that vote of confidence for the whole system here. Okay, so Joanne, you have a student doing grade 2 exam through the time warp technology. Yeah, exactly what the student is playing is what the examiner is going to hear. You're not going to have any problem with audio quality. It's going to be as if the student's sitting right there with the examiner and vice versa. Is it possible to play the rhythm on one key? Yeah, that's actually preferable on internet MIDI. Use one key. It'll be better than, it'll come out exactly as the student, if the student's comfortable with it. Some students still need to clap. And so we've got the video integration that we'll be able to hear them that way, whatever they're comfortable with. You know what, I'm going to dig over to the Q&A. I want to make sure I'm not leaving those questions behind. Okay, so do examiners give students a choice to play own choice after group pieces or at the end of the exam? That's something I used to do all the time. I don't anymore. I found too many students just want to play all their pieces. Once they get going on pieces, they just want to keep going. So in this particular spot, I just asked if you wanted to play that own choice piece later. If the student is struggling, I'll ask if they want to do something else. I'll give them that option. But I just try to stay neutral. I try to stay out of it, but I just try and give the choice. How did you know if the student was singing back the ear training melody rather than, or it was playing back or singing back? Sometimes if I'm in person, I'll ask, are you going to sing back or play back? For this particular student, I just guessed. I didn't even mean to guess. It just kind of happened that way. Most students are playing it back, not singing it back. But usually I ask, are you going to play back or sing back? And I try to make sure that I do ask. Because some students, you tell them it's a playback, they've rehearsed it as a sing back, they think they have to do it as a playback. Please coach your students to challenge us. We've got so many different syllabi going on. Examiners make mistakes all the time like this, and we've seen that a lot with the online exam. Students don't realize they can ask to hear that again, especially ear training online. Hopefully the musicology app helps us fix that. Are these exams available to US students and teachers as well? This is from Rebecca, the developer of, not developer necessarily, but the CEO, owner of musicology is here on the call. And I'm glad you're here, Rebecca, thanks. These are available to US students. Yeah, if people in the US want to take our exam online, we can do that. We don't have any in-person sessions in the US. And so students can just sign up anytime for those. Repeats in classical, okay, you put that in the chat box, Anita, so I got to that. Wendy, the student used an acoustic piano. The website refers to using MIDI technology. So my student worried they need an electric piano for the flex exam. So e-exams are a little different than flex exams. This is a weird thing because the pandemic threw a wrinkle in everything. Prior to the pandemic, all e-exams were done using digital pianos only, using the software to hook those up. Once we got stuck hearing people from only their homes, acoustic pianos is where we use Zoom or Musicology app. So you can sign up for an e-exam or a flex exam. It's the same thing. And we ask you, are you going to be using the internet MIDI technology, or do you want to use Zoom or Musicology? And that's how that kind of works. So they don't need an electric piano to do a flex exam. They can do it on an acoustic anywhere they want. Can I answer India's other question there? Carrie, I've got that comment noted. Thank you for that. Kim has all her students clap. Play one note before clapping. If you're on Zoom, get in the habit of playing a note on the key if they're doing an online exam. So they've got the microphone, and then clap, and then the examiner will hear them without missing the first couple notes. Yeah, if they don't hear the interval the first time, it depends. The examiner's got to make the call. Does the student just simply not know their intervals and need to hear this again? Or was there a problem? Explain to the examiner that there's a problem. I didn't hear that clearly through the internet. Can you play that interval again? That'll happen. Yeah, they can absolutely ask to do that. There have been problems with ear training. As we convert more to Musicology, I've been talking to more examiners this week, and we use the Musicology app, we won't have that problem anymore. It just picks everything up automatically. You can talk on top of the students. You can coach the students and talk while they're playing and they actually hear you. It's absolutely wonderful. What else do we have in the queue and or back into the chat box? Yeah, good points here. I'm just looking for things I need to address. Hey, this is great. Nobody wants to be examined. Too stressful. They just want to play for fun. No technique, no theory. And good heavens, don't make me sight read. It's discouraging. Things have changed so much, aren't they? It's hard to find those students that want to do the exams. This is where digital badges comes in. You'll see in the README file in the Google Drive folder I shared with you with all the links and everything. At the bottom, it says digital badges. Here is the draft syllabus for this new thing we have called digital badges. For those students that refuse to practice scales, they don't want to do a live exam. Okay, we're going to pre-record 3 pieces at your level, submit them for an assessment. The fee is like $49 for grades 1 to 4. You can follow any repertoire you want. You can take the repertoire from our lists. You don't even have to get approval if you don't want. The idea is just to get the students playing, pre-record 3 pieces separately, submit them, and an examiner listens to it, makes really helpful, concise comments like I've shown you today here on the screen, and gives them a gold, silver, or bronze standing for that level. It's called a digital badge exam. It's launched, not fully now, but I'm looking for people that want to use this with students and test it out. So we have some students that are going through the process now with the committee, and I'm going to present digital badges to you hopefully at the end of May in a bigger way as the final webinar of the year. And then again, at the very end of summer is our sort of launch to the webinar series in next academic year in the fall, late summer, early fall. We're going to talk all about digital badges and how we can get students reinvigorated into this assessment process. We can suck them in with the digital badge, even if we have to give that to them for a couple of times, to convince them to do an exam later, to see that it's all right, to see that the process can be fun and enjoyable and rewarding. You can learn a ton from it. You'll see that digital badges in the README file. Students with acoustic pianos, can they still use Musicology? Absolutely, that's what it's designed for. And you're looking, reach out to Rebecca Featherstone, Marilyn, if you're looking for help with Musicology. Or you can reach out to me and I can connect you to Rebecca. I'd love to know more about Musicology as well. We had a Musicology webinar, maybe it was in January. Rebecca presented to us, and we're going to have her back in the fall. Actually, late summer. I think late summer would be the time to have her back. As long as I'm stayed put. If I'm near home base here in the summer, we can start webinars a little bit earlier because I know teachers like to get a jump on things. Sometimes I'm not around though, so I apologize if these webinars aren't going to resume until September, but we'll have her back. In the meantime, just look it up online, Musicology app, reach out to me. I can connect you to Rebecca. There's tutorials. I got hooked up in minutes, a couple simple things to know, and it works great. Once you get students in the hang of how to connect on the thing, it's just wonderful. Okay, there. Yes, info@musicology.ca. Rebecca has put that in the chat box. You can reach out to her. Chris loves the digital badge exam initiative. Thanks, Chris. I hope that can work with your students there in New Brunswick. Yeah, lower stress. It helps students with disabilities and other issues and things. This is the digital badges. It's accessible for everybody. The link you'll find in the README file in the Google Drive folder. I'll make this a little clearer when I send the replay. You're all going to get the replay link as well. I'll make sure all that's there so you can see it. Yeah, Kim's got a great point here. I know 15 minutes to practice the piano, this EQAO testing in Ontario, it just stresses everybody out, although I don't think they've been doing it just since the pandemic. But yeah, kids are stressed these days. It's tough. So, how do we make it easier for them? Digital badges is a great way to start, I think. And I hope we can convince everyone of that later for piano and voice. Well, thanks everyone. I think we're winding up to the end here of our time. I expected to go an hour and a half today, and it looks like we're there. I don't see anyone has raised their hand. If anyone has their hand raised and needs to come on live and ask their burning question, let's do it. Oh yeah, there's a hand raised. Who has their hand raised? How long has it been raised? Sometimes people raise their hand accidentally. Betty Ann, I'm going to allow you to talk. You can unmute your microphone and talk live right now, or you can just say, I raised my hand by accident, and we'll lower it for you.
I raised my hand by accident. I was trying to type a question to you.
All the time.
I was just trying to get more information on the digital badges. They sound really interesting that I would be really interested in doing.
Okay, so yeah, I think May 13th, I'm going to have another mock exam like this. And then either May 20 or 27, as soon as I've got a hole, I'm going to plug in digital badges and we'll talk about and get these going. I'm looking for people to do it now. If there's still time in your teaching studio over the next 6 weeks until you're done, or 2 months, love to have your students do a digital badge on piano at whatever level 1 to 10. I'll make it obvious where that link is so you can take a look at that syllabus and let us know what you think.
I would be definitely interested even before June to do some of those if you're looking for people.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. And students can register for this now in our old database. It's the link is there to go to. They go into the student portal. You can select digital badge. It's a cheap fee. If students don't get the standing they want at the end, they can actually resubmit for half the fee. They can resubmit their 3 pieces and change the pieces, whatever, and it'll get reassessed, and maybe they can upgrade their badges. All sorts of cool ideas there. So thanks for your interest in that, everybody. A couple other questions. The badge option will be available on a trial basis in May. It's available now. And we're just testing it out. I haven't rolled this out far and wide. We haven't posted it on the website yet, but I keep mentioning and bringing it up in the webinars. But yeah, I had sort of opened this gateway about a month ago, and we haven't had too many people take advantage yet. And I still haven't actually examined. People are in the recording phase of this, so working with their students. So I'm trying to open the floodgates slowly here so that people can try this out. So yeah, definitely available anytime if you have students that are interested in this. You know what I'll do to get everyone excited here, because there's questions about this. I want to show you what the digital badge looks like. How's that? Just give me a moment. And I'll see if I can find one, just throw it on the screen, show you what this thing looks like. There we go. You can kind of see what they look like here. And the final files, I'll give you gold, silver, bronze. Here's what the gold badges look like. So I can pull this right up on the screen. That's what the gold looks like. Level 1 all the way to level 10. Silver and bronze look similar, just slightly different colors. So it just gives you an idea of what that is all about and what it looks like and what the students get. They get a JPEG or a PDF at the end that they can use however they want. They can print it off. They can display it on social media, whatever they'd like to do. So if anyone has any questions about that digital badge and needs to know more now, go ahead and email me, and I'll make sure you have the syllabus and answer your questions and get you going. I'm trying to create something that's simple, much simpler than some of the other things we have. A lot of our stuff's really complicated, and maybe you got a flavor of that today, marking along with so many little things. It's a miracle an examiner can get through it in 20, 25 minutes, right? And so it gives you a little taste of how that goes. The next one up is probably level 5 CI piano, hopefully on May 13th. Again, I'll give you the materials in advance so you can take a look. We'll do it the same kind of way. Feel free to send me your feedback on how this particular session worked. I hope it was helpful for us to all just watch separately, so the audio quality is a lot better than me trying to stream it for you. I realize some of you had trouble actually viewing that today for one reason or another, but that's the replay. I'll make that available very shortly here so that everyone can get to this on a weekend and benefit from the process. Okay, thanks everyone. I'm gonna have to rest for a little bit. That was invigorating, exciting. Thanks for your interactive questions. Everyone's going to get the exam grid and the marking form in that. I'll make sure that that's clear in the email that I send out later with the replay links. All that stuff will be there in the shared folder. And thanks everybody else. Great to see you all here. And I look forward to seeing you next Friday. Briefly, you'll have Chris Norton, who's going to talk about Wendy Norton's music. So looking forward to seeing you all then. Have a great weekend. Thanks for your helpful comments. Great session today. I've been looking forward to this for weeks. And we'll see you again soon. Bye now.